Big news today after documents are leaked from the Pentagon, from the Department of Defense. This document of war games against Bitcoin. Very interesting to see what's going on here. We're going to talk about this idea that the Department of Defense is already thinking about different scenarios in the future where Bitcoin can be used to fund different movements and different people trying to evade the control of the government, and how Bitcoin could be used to take down the USA. Talking about it right here in this video, so make sure you guys stay tuned. As Bitcoin and cryptocurrency grows in popularity, especially with the younger generation here in the US and all around the world, obviously governments and banks and people are trying to figure out how they can battle this idea of people taking money out of the traditional monetary source banking world and taking their money and putting it into a cryptocurrency, which is basically circumnavigating the banks and the governments around the world. Today, news coming out on Forbes talking about how there are Pentagon documents revealing the U.S. has planned for a Bitcoin rebellion. Now, what's funny here is that if you read through this, it's talking about how the U.S. Department of Defense has a war game scenario. Obviously, what they're always doing is looking at different scenarios, possibilities, things that could happen, and then trying to prepare for those things and being ready. You know, at the end of the day, knowing your enemy and being able to identify the possible scenarios that are coming is going to only allow you to be more prepared for those scenarios. So one of those war games is now dealing with a new generation, the Generation Z rebellion that uses Bitcoin to undermine and evade the establishment. In the Pentagon war game, young people born between the mid-1990s and the early 2010s use cyber attacks to steal money and convert it to Bitcoin. They talk about here in the document, you'll see in a second, the Z-Bellion, called the 2018 Joint Land, Air, and Sea Strategic Special Program, the JLAS. The war game is set in 2025, and it is intended to reflect a plausible depiction of major trends and influences in the world regions. And obviously, the scenario that we're currently in with the protests and all the stuff going around the world, this obviously is becoming more and more real. It's going from a thing that was a game to now, hey, this is a very, very possible outcome here. And this talks about, you know, how this Generation Z in the war game talks about how they're fighting for social change. They believe the system is rigged. So it does sound familiar here. This sounds very familiar. The group called Z-Bellion encourages cyber attacks against organizations that support the establishment, funneling stolen cash into Bitcoin to make small, below-the-threshold donations to worthy recipients and Z-Bellion members. Now, we're talking about the war game. This is the scenario that the U.S. Department of Defense is preparing for and training on, this idea of the Z-Bellion. Now, the program, which is also reportedly war game scenarios involving militants, Islamist militants, and anti-capitalist extremists, was conducted by students and faculty from the U.S. military's war colleges, the training ground for prospective generals and admirals. Now, you can see here, this is actually the document that's coming from the war game, from the pamphlet, I guess. The document's revealing the U.S. Department of Defense has seriously considered the possibility that Bitcoin could be used for a rebellion here. You know, obviously they're preparing for the worst here, and the idea that Bitcoin could be used as a means of transaction and a monetary, a currency in a world of panic and uprise. Now, obviously Bitcoin has been growing on Wall Street. Everyone's talking about it. It's in the news. So Bitcoin went from a novelty thing where it's like, hey, you can get really rich off it, to now the government is preparing for Bitcoin to be used against them. And the Pentagon war game documents have been revealed after Florida Republican Representative Matt Gaetz called for the government to freeze the money of demonstrators after countrywide protests over the killing of George Floyd turned violent this month. One of the most important tools in the authoritarian toolkit is the ability to freeze the funding of legitimate political dissidents. That's from Nathan Whitmore, a Bitcoin and cryptocurrency consultant and strategist. By separating the infrastructure of money from the infrastructure of the state of power, Bitcoin makes it much harder for this type of politically motivated confiscation. So, obviously, if the government can't freeze your assets, well, it takes away a lot of the power that they have to control the masses. And that's one of the reasons that people are afraid of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, is because the government can't control it. They can't make more of it. They can't just magically print more Bitcoin. So that's always been the idea of buying Bitcoin to fight inflation. Now with the Fed printing more money than ever before, what are we, like $28 trillion in debt at this point? It's madness. Obviously, inflation is becoming more and more prevalent in the everyday market space. Now, one thing people think about is like, hey, everything's getting more expensive. It's getting more expensive. It's more expensive to buy milk than it's ever been more. To buy milk, it's expensive. It's not that milk is more expensive. It's that the US dollar is degrading in value, that it's losing value every single day. So people are now looking for alternative investments that are going to protect their capital from inflation. And well, a lot of people are looking at Bitcoin, and that's what's going on here. So obviously the USA wants to be prepared for all types of different outcomes, and it seems like they're preparing for the worst and preparing for the idea that Bitcoin could be used by millions and millions of people around the world to basically circumnavigate this idea that the USA could freeze your assets for not following the rules or protesting. So that's pretty interesting to see. Not to say that they actually think this is going to happen. It's just like, hey, let's be prepared for the worst. This could be something that's coming. This could be something that's definitely coming, and it's really interesting to see how the USA, the Department of Defense, is preparing for it by already thinking like, hey, we need to know what to do here. We need to know what we're going to do when all these people online start using Bitcoin to transfer money back and forth, to donate money to different sources, to donate money to different causes for things that they might not want them to donate money for. So interesting to see. What do you guys think? Is the USA scared of Bitcoin? Is Bitcoin a force to be reckoned with? Let me know down in the comments below.